during his visit to Australia, Premier Li Keqiang brought with him a business delegation. Obviously, there will be much discussion on economic ties between the two governments. First of all, in which areas do you think China and Australia can further deepen their economic ties?
Well, I think Australia is very optimistic about the broad trajectory of our economic relationship with China, and we're very hopeful that we can broaden it beyond the massive trade in raw materials like iron ore to new areas like agricultural goods, foodstuffs, services like tourism and education and so on. These are the new areas where we hope there'll be a lot of economic growth available.
Now, according to Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Zheng Ziguang, the subject of Silken Road, or the One Belt, One Road initiative, is likely to be high on the agenda during Li Keqiang's visit. However, the Australian government has just been reported to have refused to integrate its 2030 vision for developing Northern Australia with the One Belt, One Road initiative. Why do you think is the consideration behind this decision?
Well, I think the approach the Australian government takes to the One Belt, One Road initiative is kind of symptomatic of the broader issues that undergo the Australia-China relationship, because economically, of course, it makes a lot of sense for Australia to integrate its northern development infrastructure processes with China's very ambitious One Belt, One Road program. But at the political level and the strategic level, I think there's anxiety about being seen to be too closely aligned with an initiative of China's in the region, which is not just of an immense economic significance, but also obviously carries a lot of strategic and political weight as well. And I think Australia is careful not to be seen to be too closely aligned with China as it achieves a bigger leadership role in Asia. Australia is very uncertain and ambivalent about that. So whilst I think many in Australia would see the economic arguments for integrating our northern development programs with the One Belt, One Road, I think the political and strategic implications are kind of making us more hesitant, are holding us back.
Well, what could be done to reassure the Australian political circle or the security analysts about the kind of determination that China wants to rise peacefully, and China wants to develop its economic ties with other countries in the world? As President Xi said in Davos, China wants other countries to prosper while China prosper at the same time.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of goodwill in Australia towards that idea. Australians are very enthusiastic about China's rise. We've seen it to be enormously to our advantage. But we are, as a country, anxious and uncertain about what China's growing power, stronger leadership role in the region will mean. And we're also very anxious about where America's going. Obviously, like everyone else, we're confused by what's happening in Washington with the Trump administration. I suspect part of the reason why Canberra's been reluctant to endorse the One Belt, One Road initiative in connection with Australia's own development is that we worry what people in Washington will say. I think people in Washington are worried that Australia is getting too close to China, and that for Australia to align itself with the One Belt, One Road initiative would be seen in Washington that way, and that worries people in Canberra. So it's a significant example of a broader problem, and that is that Australia finds itself stuck between a very strong, growing and very important economic relationship with China and a strategic relationship with America, which has a very deep history and is very deeply embedded in our sense of our security. And we haven't, as a country, yet worked out how to balance those things.
In your opinion, what do you think would be the best approach in Australia's interests, both strategically and economically, in the long term?
Well, there's no doubt that Australia's economic future very heavily depends on a growing relationship with China, on integrating our economic future more closely with China's, and on supporting China as China seeks to build a new economic order in Asia. We're very clear that we strongly support China's push to maintain a free and open international trading environment. No one in Australia supports President Trump's ideas of a more protectionist model, so that element of the picture is very clear from Australia's point of view. On the other hand, we don't want to see the United States leave Asia completely. We accept, I think, that China will be playing a bigger leadership role, but we want the United States to stay engaged as well. And I think the best outcome from Australia's point of view will be one in which the United States and China can find a way, if you like, to share power in Asia. And that would be, of course, a very difficult thing to do, but very important in terms of regional stability. One of our concerns is that with President Trump in the White House, it seems less and less likely that that's going to be possible. He seems more likely to drag America into a confrontation with China, which nobody wants, and less likely to find a way to sustain a strong US role in Asia as America's relative power declines. And that's one of the reasons why Australian policy and Australian political leaders are kind of edgy and uncertain about what is for us a really central question for our future.
Sure, we heard about this telephone incident, for instance, the unpleasant telephone conversation between the leader of Australia. It's a telling sign that maybe the United States is not the one to lean completely on anyway in the near future and probably in the long run for sure. Do you think Australia would have to choose between these two countries? Because China is not saying, look, come to me and say bye-bye to America. China is offering an opportunity. If you want, you can come and we cooperate. If not, well, what can we do? Do you think Australia really has to, choose between an idealistic approach and a pragmatic approach? Can we not have economic ties with both countries and maintain the kind of strategic or alliance with the United States?
Well, that's very much what Australians would like. We don't want to choose between America and China. We really want to maintain a strong and growing relationship with China, but we also want to maintain a strong relationship with the United States. Whether we can keep both of those going at once depends a lot on how the US-China relationship evolves. And particularly, I think it depends on how America responds to China's growing power and the sense that China is seeking a bigger leadership role in Asia. If America pushes back hard, if America tries to do what I think it's been doing for the last few years, which is try to encourage countries like Australia to align with the United States in trying to resist China's rising power, trying to prevent the emergence of that new model of great power relations that President Xi Jinping talks about. If that's America's approach to try and contain China and it seeks Australia's support, then it's going to be very hard for Australia to preserve that kind of even balance that we'd like. And so what Australia really wants is to avoid having to make that choice by seeing the US and China themselves create that new model of great power relations in which they understand and accept one another's positions in Asia and are not competing strategically. And that's why we see tensions over issues like the South China Sea as so dangerous to us, because that seems to be the point at which China's model for its future role in Asia and America's desire to remain the dominant power come directly into clash.
Where countries like Australia would have to make a choice to stand on one side or another. Since you mentioned the South China Sea,
exactly.
The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, since he took office, it seems he has been repeating the US's rhetoric on the South China Sea issue. Also, we have heard your Foreign Minister Julie Bishop made some very unfriendly comments about China and Singapore most recently. What do you think of these comments? I mean, how can we read it? Are they meant really to criticize China, or are these comments meant to appease the United States?
Well, I think they were certainly meant to please the United States. I think people in Canberra, the government here is uncertain about how to deal with Donald Trump. You mentioned the very unpleasant phone call that our Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull had with Donald Trump soon after the inauguration. I think that's caused a lot of anxiety here. But I also think we should read our Foreign Minister, Mrs. Bishop's comments in Singapore last week, where she did, as you say, criticise China. She said China, as a country that's not a democracy, could not take a leadership role in Asia. I think that's a reflection, really, of the debate that we're having in Australia, where we're trying to work out what kind of relationship should we aim to have with China as this new and very powerful player in Asia. We have never, in Australia's history, dealt with an Asian country as powerful as China is today. We're used to living in an Asia which is dominated by Western power that's our close allies. So we're still struggling to define what kind of role we should have, what kind of relationship we should have with a country as powerful as China. I think very few people in Australia would really agree with what Mrs. Bishop said in Singapore last week. I think that speech did not represent a sober and considered Australian view. But the fact that our Foreign Minister could make a statement like that does show that Australia is in flux at the moment. We're confused and anxious about it. We're trying to get a clear idea. My own view is that we have to recognise that China is going to play a bigger role, is going to play a leadership role in Asia, not necessarily as a dominant power or as a hegemon, but at least as a much more significant player than it's been in past decades, and that's just something Australia is going to have to learn to live with. And likewise, we're going to have to learn to live with the fact that America is going to play a smaller role. It's not going to be as powerful. It's not going to be as strongly committed. And that's a new reality for Australia, a disconcerting reality for Australia, but one Australia is going to have to learn to live with.